have storms in our lives. Like that storm that I had last night coming home. But we have other kinds of storms. Over the past 2 years, there have been probably at least 6 different people from this congregation who have lived lives with relatively little experience of sickness or anything, who have suddenly been knocked back on their feet by illness. Illness of one kind or another. And when it comes like that out of the blue, they don't always know how to deal with it. And there are others of us who have different kinds of crises in our lives. Perhaps it's when family members pass away. Perhaps it's when everything in our life just seems to go dark and we just feel lost and alone and depressed and don't have a clue what to do about it. I think we all have something that we can grab hold of and say, I know what he's talking about. I know what he's talking about. And I think that to a great extent that these scriptures and the psalm that we read and so many other things within our faith and within the scriptures tell us a little bit about what to do when these things come upon us. And the first thing we need to do is to take a look at these people in these stories and how they got to be where they are. Now, the story of Jonah, we always concentrate on Jonah. Amazing. We named the whole book after him, and we think that this is a story just about Jonah. But it's not just about Jonah. We know how Jonah got to where he was. Jonah was told by the Lord, Jonah, go to Nineveh. And if you don't know Nineveh, Nineveh was the home of the Assyrians. Nineveh was the camp of the enemy. Nineveh was a place of pure paganism and powerful armies that were threatening. And the ruler, the king of Nineveh, was like all-powerful. He could do anything. And God tells Jonah, okay, Jonah, go and tell this all-powerful king of Nineveh that he's all wet and that he better shape up or God's going to get it. Jonah wasn't quite sure that he wanted to do that. And I think we all know there are times when we feel like God's telling us that we ought to go do something and we don't want to do it at all. It scares us. It scares us to death. And so Jonah heads for Tarsus. Anybody know where Tarsus is? Tarsus is essentially Spain. Now, if you look at a map and you look at Israel and you look at Nineveh and you look at Tarsus and you see that they are about as far apart in that world as you can get. He hightailed it in the other direction and beat it out of town. I think we all know what that feels like too. We just want to get away from all of our problems. We think, well, maybe if I just skip town for a while, everything will calm down before I get back. Maybe if I don't do quite what God wants me to do, I go away for a while and maybe he'll forget. God's not good at forgetting. He doesn't forget his promises and he doesn't forget what he's asking us to do. So Jonah hops on a ship and heads out of town. And all of a sudden, out there on that ship, there's a big, huge storm. Now, one of the important parts of this story is that Jonah's not the only one on that ship. There's a whole crew, and there's other passengers, and there's all these people on this ship, and they're in the storm too. You see, sometimes we get into a storm that we have nothing to do with. They're just kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the storm is no less fierce and threatening for them than it is for Jonah. So we don't have to think that when we get into trouble, when things go wrong in our life, we don't have to think that it's something we did. It may, in fact, have nothing to do with us. If you don't believe that, there's another book in the Bible you ought to read. It's called Job. Sometimes we are beset by all kinds of troubles, and it has nothing to do with anything that we have done. Despite the fact that every time it seems that there's a disaster, some minister somewhere will speak up and say, this is happening to them because they didn't obey God. Please. Katrina did not happen because New Orleans didn't obey God. Now, I'm quite sure that there's a lot of things going on in New Orleans that don't obey God. That's not the point. The point is that when we get into trouble, it isn't necessarily because we've done something wrong, but it may be because God is trying to tell us to go this way, and we're going this way. And so we have to look at our situation. And these people on the boat, they realize that Job is the problem. And Job admits as much. Job says, look guys, I'm the cause of all of this. Why don't you just throw me overboard? And what do? Do they throw him overboard? No. They try everything they can to get out of that situation on their own. And we try to get out of our situations any way we can on our own. And it doesn't always work. And it didn't work for them. And finally, they say, look, Jonah, we don't want to do this to you. But if it's a choice between you going overboard and us drowning, we're going to opt for you going overboard. And so they throw Jonah into the sea. And all of a sudden, it's calm. It's calm, and the waves subside, and the wind goes, and they're all breathing a sigh of relief, and they say praises to God. And although they weren't believers, they suddenly decide, God's a good guy. Hey, we're saved, God's a good guy. And so they take vows to God. And so everything is fine, except for Jonah. And Jonah gets eaten up by a big fish. Now, I'd like to say it was a whale. Everybody says it's a whale. But this is the Mediterranean. And last time I checked, there aren't any whales in the Mediterranean. There are, however, big fish. Okay? So this big fish gobbles up Jonah. For Jonah, this whole situation has gone from really, really bad to really, really worse. But Jonah in the story, and we've stopped it before because I had mercy on Amber. Jonah is in the belly of this fish, not a pleasant place, kind of stinky place, and he prays. And he prays and he realizes he's done wrong, and even though he's in the belly of a fish in the bottom of the ocean, Things couldn't be any worse for Jonah. He prays to God. And God has the fish swim up to the shore and spit him out on the land. Jonah finally says to God, okay, I'll do what you want. And in our other story, in our other scripture about the disciples in this boat going across the sea, we can look at this story as just another, hey, there's a bunch of fishermen out in a boat going out to sea, and they get in a storm and things are going badly for them. I know what that's like. I have a brother-in-law who is a fisherman. Actually is a lobsterman. And he tells me stories about what it's like out in the ocean, and he tells me a story about, he had a 35-foot boat. They would go out, way out from Rhode Island, out till they were parallel to New Jersey. Okay? They're out on the edge of the continental shelf looking for lobsters. And he tells me about his 35-foot long boat going almost straight down a wave that is 70 feet tall. I know what it's like to be in a boat, be a fisherman, be out at sea, at least because of the stories I've been told. It's easy to just think of this as, okay, a bunch of fishermen go out in the sea and they get hit by a storm. But I think on this one we have to look at what's really going on here. You see, these people have said that they would follow Jesus. And these people are good Jews. And they are following what they think is the Jewish Messiah. And what has Jesus decided to do? He's decided to go to the other side. He's decided to go to Gentile territory. He's decided to take this Jewish message of a Messiah and take it to a people that don't even believe in that God. He's like Jonah. They're not, I think to a great extent, this storm is inside of them. They are upset about what's happening and what they're about to do, and they are scared to death. Sometimes that's what happens to us too. We're asked to do something, and they're much more like Jonah. And if you remember, there's a passage in the Bible that people ask Jesus for a sign, and they say, give us a sign. He said, you don't get any sign except for the sign of Jonah. And he never explains that. But he tells us that we are all going to be in a situation where we are going to feel just like Jonah. And it's going to be because we are unwilling to take the risk, to do the thing that God asks us to do. And we all kind of know what God asks us to do. He asks us to take His message to places that we don't want to go. He asks us to share His message, the gospel, with people who we don't think are going to even want to hear it. People like the king of Nineveh, who may be pretty angry with us if we do it. And we are scared to death. And we start that journey, and we find ourselves in the middle of the sea, and the sea is a symbol for the chaos of the world. And it gets to us. And we're scared to death. And our little ship is filling up with water, and we are bailing as fast as we can, and it doesn't seem that anything we do is making a difference. And it seems certain that we are lost. You know, for many of us, that's the moment when we say, Jesus, don't you care for me? Don't you care that I'm perishing? Don't you care that I'm in distress? Don't you care that I think I'm about to die? Sometimes we do that. And that's what they do. And sometimes we simply forget that Jesus is in the boat with us. That Jesus is there in the boat with us. And it seems like he's just sound asleep. And it seems like he doesn't care. And it seems like he has abandoned us and isn't doing a damn thing. But they call out to Jesus. Even in their distress, even in their anger at Jesus. And it's perfectly okay to be angry at Jesus or God or whoever. It's perfectly okay. They cry out to Jesus, don't you even care about me? And Jesus hears them. Jesus hears them. And suddenly, things are calm. You see, when we find out that Jesus is in fact with us, that Jesus does in fact care, then suddenly things can get much calmer in our lives. Now don't kid yourself, they're still out in the middle of the lake. And there's only one thing worse for being out in the middle of the ocean, okay? There's only one thing worse than being in a storm. And that's being in a dead calm. So don't think that everything's fine and dandy. Everything's great. But it's calm. There's a sense that can come over you when you know that Jesus is with you, and it's calm. So don't forget. Jesus is in the boat with you. Even if it feels like he's asleep and he doesn't care, Jesus is in the boat with you. And you just need to call on him. Amen.